Hey, happy Monday, everybody. Hope you're doing well. Sorry things are off to a little bit of a late start. I wanted to fix an audio problem with the video before publishing. But anyway, today we're talking about how much should I ask for when you're trying to build a price, when you're trying to ask somebody for money. How do you figure out how much money to ask for? And so this is part 4 of the series. We've already talked about a little bit of the demand components when it comes to supply and demand. But today we're talking about supply and how to get a feel for a particular market, for a particular position, and how much demand there is and where a lack of supply may be. So without further ado, let's go ahead and check out the video. So thus far in this series, we've talked about understanding what city you're in. We talked about developing a sense of self-confidence so that you can have the ability to ask for more. And we've also talked about the demand side of the equation. And specifically, I'd like to point out that we learned how demand is very nuanced. It's not just how many character artists, how many VFX artists are there out there. Demand really is a whole list of wants from a studio. And so to start things off with supply, takeaway number 1, supply follows demand. And demand is very specific. So when people want to, let's say, hire a effects artist, they're not just wanting to hire an effects artist. There's a whole laundry list of things that they want, right? So they want somebody who's local. They want somebody who maybe works well with other folks, somebody who has production experience. And as we go down the list of items in demand, what you'll find on the supply side of things is that all of those things that they want limits the supply in a given market. And guess what? That's a good thing for you. You know why? Because there's less people out there which can satisfy the demands of the clients, which means they'll probably be willing to pay more money for what you do. But remember, if you, let's say, take a city, let's pretend I take the city of Fort Collins as an example, Fort Collins, Colorado, right? And a studio wants somebody who's local, who's an effects artist, who works well with other people and has some experience. Well, there may be, let's say, 50 or 60 people in the entire area surrounding Fort Collins that uses Houdini or does effects, right? But who's going to actually check all those boxes? Once you start adding in all the different levels of demand, the number of people out there which meet all of the things they want becomes less and less. So I just want to point that out if you've never thought of that before, because a lot of folks say that, wow, everyone's trying to get into 3D, and that's true, but it's also a very small industry because of the fact that most people can't check the boxes for what people are looking for on the demand side of the equation. So again, supply will follow demand. The better you understand demand, where to go when you're trying to figure out supply. I also want to add one more thing to that, and it's this. A lot of times, the demand doesn't always mean somebody with more years of experience. The demand is not always somebody who the studio needs to pay more money for. So that's a good thing for junior artists, and that might be a bad thing for people who have too much experience as well. Again, remember, demand is very nuanced. Maybe a studio is looking for a junior who's willing to take a lower pay for the job, but is decent enough, has a good reel, and can do a lot of the tedious tasks that the studio needs to get done. It just depends on exactly what niche the studio is trying to fill. I also want you to think about this. Where do all the other juniors go? Many of them go to major cities. And as a result, there's probably an oversupply of juniors in Vancouver, in LA, and all these different places as compared to, let's say, a smaller market like Denver or Nashville, which may be way better for a junior artist because there's less people trying to apply specifically for junior roles. And so I want to point that out to you guys, because supply is nuanced just like demand. And in order to understand the market, the game that you're playing, you have to be very, very specific. And this naturally leads us to takeaway number 2. Research your job title and understand your market. And we're actually going to get a bit hands-on with this. There's a really great resource I want to introduce to you guys. It's a VFX and animation job listing that gets updated every single day. It's one giant Google Docs sheet, and I'll include the link with this video. So let's go ahead and jump over and check that out. So here we are in the animation VFX game industry jobs posting Excel spreadsheet. And you should be able to find a link to this either in the live chats or somewhere on the screen. I'll be sure that you guys have access to this link somehow. But basically put, this spreadsheet right here has every job posting that's related to animation, VFX, game industry over the past 3 months. So anything that's related to that, it's all right here, which is pretty sweet. Now, if we click on one of these boxes, we press Control A, we look down here at the bottom right, we can see that we have about 2,400 job postings in the past 3 months. So that's pretty cool. But where this really becomes cool is when you can filter that down to specific positions. So let's say that I want to get an understanding of how many job postings there were for effects, VFX, CFX. This is kind of like your Houdini stuff, right? I can click that. I can click on one of these boxes, Control A, and it looks like we have 193 job postings in the past 3 months. Okay, so what about something else? Let's go down here to texturing. So texturing all levels, same deal, Control A. Wow, we only have 28. So that might give you some insight right there. right? Because if you're trying to, let's say, design a price as an effects artist, you don't want to be charging the same thing as a texture artist. Why is that? Well, supply and demand. There is more demand for effects artists just based on the number of available positions. I mean, the thing is that these studios usually only post these job positions when they don't already have somebody in mind. So these studios who are posting for these jobs, most of them are in a pinch because otherwise they would just hire the person they want and they wouldn't need to post for a job, right? So when we're thinking about supply and demand, one way that we can get an understanding of supply and perhaps a lack of supply is by the number of positions based on a particular title. Okay, so that's really cool, but supply is also relative to a particular market. So let's say that we filter this out by city. If, let's say, you want to move to a mid-sized city, and you don't want to deal with LA, you don't want to deal with London or, Vancouver, this or that, right? Well, a really good way to figure out how much action is happening in a mid-sized city or perhaps a small city is by looking at the number of postings available, right? So as an example, in Atlanta, we have about 18 jobs posted in the whole city of Atlanta in the past 3 months. Compare that to, let's say, Austin. So we'll go down, we have Austin, Texas, and we go down a little bit, boom. Looks like we have about 27 positions in Austin, which tells us that Austin might have almost twice the demand as Georgia does, as Atlanta does, when it comes to the number of job postings that we see. Now, keep in mind that you have to track this stuff over time. Maybe in the past 3 months, there just happened to be a lot of work in Austin, and it's just kind of an anomaly for some reason. Maybe. But as you track this over time, maybe we can see that Austin seems to be dropping more and more jobs over time. And that would be a clue. That would be a hint that you are, let's say, trying to get into a growing market. Or that you're trying to, let's say, get a job in a market that's seeing more and more demand. And that's good. Or perhaps in the case of Atlanta, maybe folks have been saying, oh yeah, Atlanta's got tons of awesome jobs. There's, Hollywood's moving to Atlanta, et cetera, et cetera. But maybe over time, you could see that play out differently by taking a look at the number of job postings that happen over time. So this sort of intel is exactly the kind of stuff that you want to keep track of when it comes to getting a feel for the supply of a particular role in a given market. Also, you have to keep in mind the population of these cities as well. And let's say that we try to figure out how many jobs per capita there are in Austin, Texas. So if we go to Austin, let's go ahead and again highlight that whole section. We have 27 jobs. Let me go ahead and bring up a calculator and we can look up the population of Austin, Texas. And the population looks like is about 1 million people, okay? And it's been going up. So if we take, what would that be? 27 divided by 1 million. So that would be, there's 1,000, there's 1 million. We have a jobs to population ratio of 0.000027, okay? Let's now compare that to Beijing. So let's go down to Beijing. Beijing has a lot more job postings, but obviously a lot more population. So let's go down here. Looks like Beijing has about the same, 20 jobs right there, okay? So Beijing population looks like population's 20 million. So, as you can imagine, this is about to be rather shocking. 20 jobs divided by 20 million. That means based off of this right here, that Austin, the likelihood of you, let's say, having a job compared to the number of people there in Austin is far higher than what you would have in Beijing. So that's another good exercise to go through when you're trying to compare cities, when you're trying to get a sense of demand and the potential for opportunity in these different places, okay? So that's another thing to keep in mind. Now let me show you why big cities are bad for juniors and mid to small cities are way better. If we go to Burbank, California, we know that all the really big VFX houses, all your really top-notch folks out there in Burbank, California are doing some 3D, right? So usually their standard, I mean, we have Marvel Studios right here, right? Usually their standard is pretty darn high compared to a mid-sized city. And guess what? If we take a look at these job titles, I don't see a single junior or internship posting in here. So that might be pretty shocking, right? I mean, you might want to think twice if you're a junior going to Burbank as opposed to, let's say, a mid-sized city. Again, that demand is very specific. People in Burbank want folks who are more experienced, who maybe have more years under their belts, versus folks in a mid or small-sized city who might not care as much. So do keep that in mind when you're trying to figure out the supply of a particular position. So there's a lot more things we can do to figure out where demand is and where supply is. Do keep in mind, though, that this is not an exact science. We can try to maybe use some formulas to figure out supply based on different metrics, but they're all really just trying to give us general insights about a particular market, okay? So the ideal situation you want here, if you want to charge good money and be aggressive with the risks that you take during, let's say, a negotiation, is you want to find a market that's growing, that's hot, and you also want to apply for a position that is well in demand. If you combine those two things together, then you can, let's say, approach an interview and you can charge a higher price with more confidence because you know your market and because you know your position and the general demand that's out there for what you do. So check out that Excel sheet. That's going to give you a lot of insight into the supply and demand of the service that you're offering people. Okay. Well, there you have it, guys. If you have any questions or comments, go ahead and ask that or put it in the chat right now. One other thing that I could say about supply here is that, the demand for this stuff changes on a month-to-month basis. So it's really worth keeping track of the number of job postings. And perhaps you can see that some of this stuff is seasonal. Maybe for whatever reason, the month of November, there's just a ton of job postings happening for whatever reason. And let's say that I apply for a job in November. Well, guess what? I'll probably be asking for more money because of the fact that I know that the typical supply might be strained based, again, on the number of job postings that I'm seeing. So these things kind of change over time. It basically, it's not a science. It's more of an art. It's something that you have to kind of figure out as you go. But as you're making a price, that's one of the main considerations you ought to make. What market are you in? What job position are you in? And how does that look over time? So if you bring that all together, that will make you more confident, and that will also allow you to ask for more when the time is right. Okay, so that's about it for today. Go ahead and follow my social stuff if you haven't yet for great career advice and tutorials and, all that fun stuff. As always, you can find way more things at cgforge.com, specifically related to Houdini. And thanks for watching. Oh, actually, you know what? I just saw a comment come through. I take that back. This one here is from Isa. Is it possible to relocate for a position with the help of a employer? Yes, it is. But you just have to be sure that you understand the details of the situation. You need to, again, look at the cost of living in that given city. Are they paying you enough to get by? What are your taxes? I talked about that particular thing as the very first video in this series, where we take a look at cities and we figure out how expensive it is to live. Just make sure that you have enough to get by, and never move to a city where you're locked in working at a studio. They're not paying you enough to get by, and they're just trying to fish for cheap work. So it can be good, but just really be sure that you understand the details of what you're getting yourself into, and make your decision based on that. Okay, awesome question. I think that about does it then. So until next time, you guys, have a great day.